Hello and welcome to Views on News. I am Jawad. Tehami. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has presented a letter to US President Donald Trump saying, let me quote, "The letter I sent to the Nobel Prize Committee. It's nominating you for the Peace Prize, which is well deserved and you should get it," unquote. President Donald Trump responded by saying, let me quote, "Thank you very much. Coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful," unquote. Now, this happened when Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu met US President Donald Trump at the White House, repeating their earlier proposal of displacing thousands of Palestinians out of Gaza into the neighboring countries. Earlier in February, US President Donald Trump had floated this particular idea of taking over the Gaza Strip and converting it into the Riviera of the Middle East and also displacing the Palestinians to the neighboring countries. There was a widespread condemnation of that particular idea at that particular time. The United Nations had condemned, with the United Nations Secretary General saying, let me quote, "It is vital that we stay true to the bedrock of international law. It is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing," unquote. Now, Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and US President Donald Trump have repeated this particular idea when Israel and Hamas are in indirect talks in Qatar, with the Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson saying it is too early to talk about any details of these talks as they are happening, but there are positive impressions, unquote. Let me quickly bring in our esteemed panel of guests who are joining studio as well as online to talk about this situation as it is developing. In the studio, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Air Vice Marshal retired Ijaz Malik, senior analyst. Mr. Malik, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Also in the studio, we are honored to be joined by Mr. Ali Hamza, expert of Middle East affairs. Mr. Ali Hamza, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Later on in the show, we'll be joined by another participant, and I'll be introducing him as he joins in. Mr. Malik, let's begin with this particular nomination on the part of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu of US President Donald Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. So this particular nomination happening from somebody whose acts in Gaza have been termed as genocidal. Is he even eligible to nominate somebody for the Peace Prize?
Well, it's a big question mark on that. Not only, from the, I would say, the normal norms and the traditional value system attached to such prestigious awards, but to the very conscious of the international community. Ironically, a person who is being nominated, or who actually, I mean, it's not something hidden that he always had, this thing on his bucket list, that he wanted to have a Nobel Prize, and he was in fact trying to set the environment and stage wherein he emerges as the perfect candidate for this particular nomination. But in all logical and I mean, going by any conventional rationalization of this preposition, I think it would undermine his own position for being nominated. I mean, even if ultimately he gets it, because there is a process and there is a committee, and ultimately, they have their own criteria to approve that award. But this would always remain in history as a strain that he was nominated, and not only nominated, but his nomination was welcomed by him, as you quoted in your intro.
Yeah, and this particular response by President Donald Trump, when he says, coming from you in particular, this is very meaningful.
Yes.
What is the tone that is underlying in this very response of President Trump to this particular move by Netanyahu?
As if Mr. Netanyahu himself is a champion of human rights.
That is,
yeah, or he himself is widely regarded globally as an ambassador of peace and prosperity for a region. So it is a very paradoxical statement, and I think it casts a negative shade on the very legitimacy of being nominated. I mean, he had other options. For example, Pakistan is one, and obviously the Pakistan government, while recommending him for this award, we had a background of his role in negotiation for likely peace or at least a ceasefire between two nuclear armed states. And then he had his role in Iran. If it was coming from Iran, for example, and he would have said the same words for the Iranian leadership, it would have positively meant a lot. Rather than, it's 180-degree opposite coming from the butcher of Middle East, and he is taking pride in that. It would be, I think, taken as a very negative comment in history, and it will stay even if he is ultimately.
And especially given the fact when the International Court of Justice has termed his acts in Gaza as genocidal, the International Criminal Court has issued arrest warrants against him.
Exactly. You see, even normal, just giving you a day-to-day life example, if you want to be nominated for membership to a club, for example, the very member, there is an eligibility criteria for your sponsor and the one who is the seconder for that nomination, and then the committee decides. So if you have a criminal nominating you, an internationally recognized criminal, so what is the credibility of that award, even if he eventually gets that? But I think if we go by the profile of Mr. Trump, all his life has been like that, he believes in getting the end objectives and not the means to achieve that.
Right. Mr. Ali Hamza, what's your opinion regarding these two statements? If we look at them by the very face of these very two statements, this particular nomination coming from a person who has been issued arrest warrants against by the International Criminal Court, as well as the International Court of Justice saying that his acts in Gaza, since he unleashed that brutality on the innocent people in Gaza after 7th of October 2023 as genocidal.
Well, I'd say that irony is lost, I think, on the President Donald Trump as well as Benjamin Netanyahu himself as well, that the two very renowned warmongers of their times, to people who have caused instability across the world, they are nominating and congratulating each other for the Nobel Peace Prize. So it is quite interesting and sadly interesting that even in the United States, when Benjamin Netanyahu arrives, and interestingly he keeps on coming very frequently there in the times when President Donald Trump is there in the White House, there are hundreds and thousands of people protesting in the streets of the United States as well, in the very same Congress where the representatives of the people of the United States are there. People walked out when Benjamin Netanyahu was there, and Rashida Tlaib stood there and called him a war criminal. So that is what he is, and as he has been, there have been arrest warrants against Benjamin Netanyahu, and calling him by his nickname, and feeling very happy, feeling very touched upon this gesture from a war criminal. I think it is a question on the moral platitudes United States has been teaching the world. When it comes to the credibility of any such proposition, I'd say that nobody of us can see peace anywhere in Gaza. For if Benjamin Netanyahu is nominating US President Donald Trump for peace between India and Pakistan, I think even that makes some sense. But if he is nominating him for brokering peace in the Middle East still does not witness peace. There are still children starving, walking around in the streets of Gaza, being ruthlessly bombed by Israeli warplanes and Israeli quadcopters. People still are lined up in very long lines for food, and they are being mercilessly
That's
being
one
fired
side of the
upon.
picture.
So there is no peace actually.
There is no peace as far as the situation in Gaza is concerned. As we have seen, there is a hunger crisis. The entire territory has been converted into ruins due to that very relentless bombardment on the part of the Israeli regime. And it's forcible. But looking at this particular statement by Netanyahu, when he says, let me quote, he's referring to President Donald Trump, he's forging peace as we speak in one country, in one region, after the other. So by looking at this particular statement, is not specifically talking about the peace in Palestinian territories or specifically in Gaza. He's referring to the other regions or other countries.
Well, that's the point I'm trying to make, that nominating Donald Trump for the Peace Prize by Pakistan, that makes some sense, because there has been a ceasefire between India and Pakistan, which is owed to the intervention by President Donald Trump. But when it comes to Benjamin Netanyahu, what countries and what regions is he talking about? Because when it comes to the war between Iran and Israel, the role Donald Trump played there, and specifically the role he played for peace, I think that is very questionable. Like bombing Iran first, violating the sovereign rights of Iran as a state, violating international law, being very belligerent. If this is brokering peace, I think then Donald Trump obviously deserves a Nobel Peace Prize for brokering peace, but it is not. And then also just emphasizing that coming from Benjamin Netanyahu, this is very significant for Donald Trump, as if it came from Mother Teresa or some person of some that stature, because Benjamin Netanyahu is a very known war criminal. And when he talks about peace, it is just ironic that it comes from the mouth of Benjamin Netanyahu, who is a very known warmonger and whose genocidal intent has been very clear, made clear by the practical steps he has taken during this whole 21-month genocide against people of Gaza.
We are now joined by another participant, Mr. Nazzal. He is analyst of Palestinian affairs, joining us on the video link. Mr. Nazzal, thank you very much for your time, for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Do you think after Benjamin Netanyahu's nomination for President Donald Trump for Nobel Peace Prize, the Nobel Prize Committee is going to take into consideration the factors which are related to Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu himself, that his acts in Gaza have been termed as genocidal by International Court of Justice. He has also been issued arrest of warrants by the International Criminal Court. Do you think these factors are going to be in consideration when Nobel Prize Committee takes stock of this nomination?
First of all, it is really farcical that a genocidaire like the Israeli occupation Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is talking about peace and about the Peace Nobel Prizes. This was not expected from a man whose hands are stained with the blood of the Palestinian children and the Palestinian women. A man who is working deliberately to starve a whole nation to death, just like what's happening today in the Gaza Strip. A man who believes in building more colonies and supporting his colonists to attack the Palestinian civilians in their villages and their towns, setting fire to their houses, killing their children, and destroying their properties. Is this man a man of peace who has the qualification to address the Nobel Peace Prize Committee and nominate the American president for that? I don't think so. But because of the hypocritical word, and because of the absence of balance of power, and because the people who are practicing all forms of injustice and oppression wield all the reins of power, that's happening. So this won't make any change. And we all know that the American administration has never blamed the Israeli occupation Prime Minister for his crimes. And we all know what happened with the general prosecutor of the ICC when he issued arrest warrant against the Israeli occupation Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu and his defense minister at that time. So that is the position of the American administration, whether the current one or the one during the term of Joe Biden. They are fully supporting Israel, supporting its crimes. And we know it was possible for the American administration to stop the Israeli genocide against Gaza by a telephone call. And we saw how they stopped the war between Israel and Iran. It did not take President Trump more than one telephone call to tell Netanyahu, stop your pilots and your warplanes from bombing Tehran, and they stopped.
Right, Mr. Nazzal, now when we talk about this particular nomination, we have known for a fact there is a mounting pressure as far as the domestic politics within Israel is concerned. The opposition also urging Netanyahu to immediately end the war and bring back the hostages. Now, do you think this particular move which has been made by Benjamin Netanyahu towards President Donald Trump is to address that particular mounting challenge at home?
Look, concerning the Israeli opposition, I think it is very weak because the whole Israeli society is drifting towards the right and the extremist right. And they represent now the majority, whether in the parliament and the government coalition. So domestically speaking, there won't be that pressure on the Israeli prime minister concerning the protest against the government and the public demand that the Israeli captives be back to Tel Aviv. These demonstrations are not that big. Only the families of the Israeli captives and their friends who participate in these demonstrations. So we are not talking about massive demonstrations, massive protests against Netanyahu. Now, what we focus on is the external pressure represented by the American administration, if it is correct to call it a pressure. I think that they are using the very soft means to convince Netanyahu that it is time to stop the war because the American administration feels that it can reorder the cards of the Middle East and there is no need for the war against Gaza to continue because stopping the war against Gaza means to Donald Trump that he is going to rearrange the geopolitical situation of the Middle East. And we see every time Donald Trump talks about the ceasefire, he connects that to the new regional arrangement in terms of some Arab countries joining the Abraham Accords. That is the focus of the American administration. Stop the war on Gaza, and we award you in other areas in the Middle East, like normalizing relations with Israel, and at the same time, and this is very important, and we need not to forget the situation in the occupied West Bank and the increasing Israeli settlements that are being built every day with American green light and the
Right, Mr. Nazzal, I get your point very well. I get your point very well. There is a repetition of that particular idea which was earlier floated by President Donald Trump back in February of taking over Gaza and converting that one into a Riviera of the Middle East and also displacing thousands of Palestinians to neighboring countries. I'll come back to you for your understanding regarding that. There was a widespread condemnation on that particular idea. Also, the United Nations in particular coming up with very strong statements regarding that. Mr. Malik, going back to that, the objectives related to this particular move by Benjamin Netanyahu, does it owe to that very pressure at home that was mounting against him to end the war immediately, get the hostages back? Are there any other factors at play behind this particular move by Benjamin Netanyahu for President Donald Trump?
Well, I would tend to agree with our worthy colleague, Mr. Osama Nazul, that there is no across the country pressure, mounting pressure on Benjamin Netanyahu. These are only families and few other supporters of the hostages, and actually hostages are providing him and his forces a pretext to continue their atrocities. Imagine if these hostages issue was resolved 6 months back, we would have saved thousands of lives. So they are using this as a pretext, and we have to see that American administration and Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, they are, in my considered opinion, they are complementing each other in the greater plan for this region. That Israel has, broken the, I would say, it has defanged the very strength of the resistance, at least for a reasonable time, posed by Hamas in this region, and it would help America to pursue, if they are serious in that objective of rearranging the map of this region. And they have utilized these brutalities to condition or soften the grounds for geopolitical objectives. And this destruction of buildings, infrastructure, and killing people or genocide of people is just the means, and the end objectives are different. So I think in achievement of those end objectives, there is a commonality of interest, and Mr. Trump and Mr. Netanyahu, they are complementing each other's effort in this plight of poor Palestinians.
Once again, move back to Mr. Osama Nazul. Mr. Osama Nazul, going back to that very important thing, the repetition of that very idea, which was earlier floated by President Donald Trump in February, which earned a widespread condemnation, particularly the strong statements coming from the United Nations, the Secretary General himself, as well as the Human Rights Chief of the United Nations. There are multiple views as far as this particular idea is concerned. Do you think it is only limited to the talk, or there is a practical plan which could be implementable regarding displacement of such a huge population from Gaza into neighboring countries?
Yeah, we have not stopped hearing about such ideas since the start of the Israeli genocide war against Gaza. And that was the plan that was expressed by different Israeli officials, that the aim of this war is to move the Palestinian people out of the Gaza Strip, at least from the northern part of Gaza. And Israel used all the methods, the mass murder of the Palestinian civilians, the destruction of the civilian infrastructure, no hospitals, no water plants, no electricity. Nothing is left in Gaza. Everything is destroyed. And they did not succeed in displacing the Palestinians out of Gaza due to many factors. First, because of the Palestinians' resilience, steadfastness, and their believe that they have no alternative for their land. And the second factor is the position of the government and people of Egypt by not opening the crossing and refusing the settlement of the Palestinian citizens of Gaza in Sinai. Now, Israel got a new idea, which is called the Gaza Humanitarian Foundation, which is a step one in the process of displacement. As we heard yesterday, the Israeli Minister of War, Katz, talking about the humanitarian transit areas where they want to bring all the people of Gaza together on the ruins of Rafah city in the south of Gaza, and then give them the option to leave to different countries. Is that implementable? This what was discussed between Netanyahu and Donald Trump during the dinner Trump made yesterday, and they call it relocation of the Palestinians, which is expulsion of the Palestinians. I don't think that this idea is implementable as long as the Arab region, the Arab governments, Egypt, Jordan, and others stand firm in the face of this idea and refuse the Israeli-American dictation with this regard.
So what about this? When during this particular meeting, the number of statements by Benjamin Netanyahu, in response of which President Donald Trump says that there has been great cooperation on the matter from surrounding countries, and so something good will happen.
Yeah, but we heard the position of Egypt, and that is the most important thing, I think, because Egypt is on the border, and it is like the first Arab country who can decide whether to for this to happen or not. And the Egyptian president and the different Egyptian officials stated 100 times that they won't allow this to happen, and the Palestinians have no other land but Palestine, and at the same time, the people of Gaza themselves, despite all the horror that they are going through, they say that they won't leave Gaza and they refuse the life of refuge that they experienced in 1948 and in 1967. So I don't think that it is implementable, especially the position of other countries, including the European Union, the United Nations, and many countries around the world who asked the American president to put this idea aside and not to dream of Gaza free from its indigenous people, the Palestinians.
Right. Mr. Malik, what's your understanding regarding? Is it doable? Is it implementable? Or is it mere talk?
I don't think so. Under the prevalent environment and the response of neighboring countries and the resistance being offered by the the actual stakeholder, the inhabitants of the Gaza Strip, this is doable. Actually, while the entire Middle East has seen lot of changes from 60s and a war in 67 or 73 and then Oslo Accord and then Abrahamic Accord, a lot of goodwill has been created progressively for Israel, acceptability in the region, but I think still that time hasn't come where the people or the parties to the Palestine issue, they totally abandon that cause of having a state. So I don't think so it's doable, but it will remain, I think, rhetoric. And
so regarding this particular meeting, the two-state solution also was talked about. Now, Benjamin Netanyahu says that I think the Palestinians should have all the powers to govern themselves, but none of the powers to threaten us. That means the sovereign power, like overall security, will always remain in our hands. Now, this last part of this particular statement by Benjamin Netanyahu, do you think they would be able to get the hold of the entire security in the Palestinian territories, including Gaza?
well, it could be their desire and a common desire supported by Americans, but I think the kind of resistance this very idea has and the international community, United Nations, as you mentioned, I don't think so unless that things dramatically change. We don't know how the, it's a turbulent world and things are, being shaped and reshaped every,
so that,
day.
Mr. Malik, since the very outset of this particular aggression by Israeli regime and its forces on innocent people in Gaza, we've been discussing this particular issue. A number of times you're of the view those objectives which were set by Israeli regime were not fulfilled. So dismantlement or doing away with completely with Palestinian resistance group Hamas hasn't been achieved.
Yes.
So in light of that, taking
And now
overall security of Gaza Strip, how's that going to happen if we try to understand Israeli perspective?
A year back, the Israeli perspective we have been discussing that they wanted to defang the might, supposed might of the resistance being offered by Hamas and the other such entities in the region, and they want to eliminate the current threats and threats which are in the offing for, let's say, another decade or so. So that was the objective. But now what Mr. Netanyahu just said and you quoted, that means that they just want the Palestinian to be in that area as a community which is a social entity and which has no political or sovereign status. So that's not acceptable. That's not what was promised to them by United Nations, or that has been the stance of the.
That is exactly what we do understand when we look at another statement by Netanyahu. If people want to stay, they can stay, but if they want to leave, they should be able to leave. It shouldn't be a prison. It should be an open place and give people a free choice. Right? We are working with the United States very closely about finding countries that will seek to realize what they always say, that they wanted to give the Palestinians a better future, I think we are getting close to finding several countries.
Yes, you see, now what ground environment they have created in Gaza, they are not livable, right? So what he is trying to contemplate, that in comparison to this area, and with all the destroyed infrastructure, medical facilities, schools and colleges, so on the other side there is a brighter future which has education, medical and other things in other countries.
So
for example,
after ruining that territory completely, unleashing that brutality for about 22 months now, he's being empathetic in this particular statement.
No, it is just like this, that you destroy somebody's house and then you say that I am going to provide you a wonderful tent to live in.
A better future and a free choice. He has used these terms in this particular statement. What does that mean?
Free choice
is
means
he
that
trying to show that he's empathetic
they can
now?
migrate as a refugee. Haven't they seen in Sabra and Shatila what happened to Palestinians? So do you think they will be foolish enough to migrate and repeat the same history under captivation in some other country? And no other country is willing to accept them. I mean, it's very clear. Even the closest ally of Israel or American, they don't want Palestinian to be on their land. So nobody is welcoming them. So where would they go? Is United States ready to migrate this entire population and provide them livelihood and status of immigrants in America? America hasn't done that to Afghans. There are 150,000 Afghanis who were promised by nothing less than the US Congress that they would be repatriated post withdrawal to United States. And so far around only 15,000 have been repatriated. So if they can't fulfill those promises, who is going to guarantee this particular issue? And these people are not willing. Those Afghanis, they are dying to migrate to America. So they are willing, and they are not being repatriated. These people are not willing to leave their home. They say that just leave us to ourselves and we would rebuild ourselves.
Right. So Mr. Ali Hamza, what's your understanding when President Donald Trump talks in terms that he wants to take over Gaza and convert it into the Riviera of the Middle East? What do we understand? What sense do you make out of it? Converting it into a Riviera of the Middle East for what purposes?
Well, as a person from the global south and as an analyst of the international relations, when we criticize Donald Trump, it is not just for the person he is. It is for the sort of things he says and sort of politics he conducts. So being a very, very brutal politician, even from the American standards as well, he does not care about anybody who lives in Gaza. You are talking about a place where a humanitarian disaster is unfolding, where people are being starved, where they have been relentlessly bombed, and he talks about building a Riviera in that place, disregarding what are the sentiments of the people living there, the people who have been fighting for their identity, for this land, for 7 and more decades.
I get your point well. Is this massive displacement doable? Is it practically implementable? And what can the United Nations do about it? When we talk about the UN Secretary General's earlier statement about this particular thing, it is vital that we stay true to the bedrock of international law. It is essential to avoid any form of ethnic cleansing. The UN Human Rights Chief said any forcible transfer in or deportation of people from occupied territory is strictly prohibited. We also saw the UN Special Representative for the Palestinian territory saying it's incitement to commit forced displacement, which is an international crime. Is there anything practically the UN, after these strong worded statements, could do to stop it happening?
What I want to be very clear about, that the theoretical concept of being international law lacking any enforcement mechanism, it is very much relevant now, and particularly in this case. The strongly worded statements, they have failed to dissuade Benjamin Netanyahu from conducting this genocide. They have failed to dissuade any state in the world from supporting and enabling the Israeli Zionist regime from doing what they have done to the Palestinians. So I think whatever comes from the United Nations, the condemnation which comes from there, it can be a moral support. But on the ground, it does not change anything. When it, if you ask about the doability of displacing Palestinians in large numbers from Gaza or not. So this is what actually has always been the intention of the Zionist regime, enabled by the United States essentially, that they have always tried to wipe them off from this land, which not only Gaza but the West Bank, what they say Judea and Samaria as well. But doability of it is very questionable, because in the past few days even, in the Beit Hanun, Hamas has been neutralizing and targeting Israeli defense forces very clearly. And as a few hours back, Abu Ubaidah, the spokesperson by Hamas, was very clear that Israel should not make the mistake of keeping their forces on Gaza Strip, because there can be more hostages in the future. So
it's not
Hamas
possible
not
for the
neutralized right
Israeli
now.
regime and its forces to take complete hold of the security in Gaza.
Yeah,
It's not possible.
Yeah.
Mr. Osama Nazul, do you see any success as we speak? The truce talks are underway, indirect truce talks between the representatives of Israel and Hamas in Qatar, of course mediated by Qatar. There are a number of statements by the Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson regarding that one as well. Do you think after Israel breached an earlier ceasefire that was reached in January, it was breached by Israel in March, are there any sort of chances, do you see any sort of a truce in sight immediately after these negotiations? We get to see that very statement by Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson saying that there have been positive impressions.
Now, regardless of the place where these negotiations are held, the important thing is the decision that comes out of the White House, because the decision to stop the genocide against Gaza or to continue is made in Washington, not in Tel Aviv, not in Doha or any other place. And according to the statements we heard from the American president over the past few days, he seems serious about getting the parties to a ceasefire deal. And he said that by the end of this week, that ceasefire would be declared. And according to the analysis and the assessments that we have in the region, I think it's feasible to see that by the end of the week. But the problem that is not solved is that it is a 60-day ceasefire. What guarantees can the Palestinian side get from the Americans to make sure that Israel won't resume its genocidal war after the end of the 60 days? That is the question that until now there is no answer to.
Mr. Osama Nazul, analyst of Palestinian affairs, joining us through the video link. Thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. Mr. Malik, what's your understanding? Do you see sort of success in these negotiations?
I think there would be a success in a ceasefire. How sustainable that would be, that remains to be seen. But there would be a ceasefire, at least temporarily.
But when we specifically talk about the first ceasefire that was reached on 15th of January and it came into effect on 19th of January, regarding that very stage two, it was agreed between the stakeholders that Israeli forces will make a complete withdrawal, right? So now going back to that very statement again by Benjamin Netanyahu, that he's interested to take over the control of the security there in Gaza. So once they agree to a complete withdrawal in an earlier ceasefire, then comes this particular statement. Do you think whatever the truce or a ceasefire is reached, this particular provision, a complete withdrawal of the Israeli forces, is not going to be the part of it?
There could be a modification for this demand, and there could be a hybrid solution wherein there was a counter proposal, if you recall, that there could be a security arrangement by some common force under the auspices of United Nations, or some arrangement by the guarantors in the Middle East. So there could be a temporary security arrangement being provided by the neighboring countries. So that could be acceptable to maybe both the parties.
Mr. Ali Hamza, what's your understanding? How are you looking at these negotiations? This particular phase of negotiations as they are happening, they're the indirect negotiations which are of course happening in Qatar between Hamas and Israel, with the Qatar's foreign ministry spokesperson saying that what is being talked about is a general framework paper and the detailed talks will follow.
The same statement by the Qatari foreign ministry, it was augmented by the fact that they have said that it could take some time to finalize the deal. I think this statement is the most close to reality, because there are a few friction points. There are some
President Donald Trump's
lacuna in
statement
the
that
deal.
it could be reached within
Well,
a week?
well, I'd say I'd clearly call out President Donald Trump for being very politically very reductionist, because for the reason there has been no decision on who is going to rule Gaza after the ceasefire. There has been no decision on a permanent, because Israel till now, in the words of Benjamin Netanyahu, is not clear about permanently ending hostilities with Hamas. They are very clear that they would not accept any role of Hamas in a future governance. And Hamas has clearly called out that it accepts the proposal in good faith, but it wants serious revisions, and these revisions, they have been called out by Israel as being impractical and unacceptable.
So what's that sticking point?
So it will obviously take some time. It will take some time for both parties to agree to a common ground where there is a decision
what's
about
that
ruling.
one single sticking point?
Well, I'd say that it is not a single sticking point, but there are a very few ones. The first one, obviously, who is going to rule Gaza after the ceasefire? The second one, will Israel permanently end hostilities against Palestinian people, particularly in Gaza, or not? These two are the points, these two are the deal breakers which have always been there. And when President Donald Trump always calls for a permanent ceasefire, for a very quick ceasefire, he is always missing the elephant in the room.
Mr. Ali Hamza, expert in Middle East affairs, thank you very much for being with us on the show tonight. Really appreciate that. And Mr. Air Vice Marshal retired Ijaz, Malik senior analyst, thank you very much for your time also, for being with us on the show. Really appreciate that. With that, we come to the end of today's episode. Till the next one, take good care of yourselves.